I was a boy, I used to think that adults understood the world. I thought the people in charge had some wisdom I didn't, some steady hand on the wheel that kept everything from falling apart. My name is Elias, and I'm 83 years old now, and I've lived long enough to see that belief crumble more than once. I've also lived long enough to recognize when history starts repeating itself, even when everyone insists it's different this time. I grew up in a neighborhood where people argued about everything except the things that truly mattered. They fought over land that didn't feed them, leaders who didn't know them, and promises that no one ever intended to keep. I remember watching my father read the newspaper at the kitchen table, shaking his head in that slow, resigned way he had. He wasn't shocked by anything he read. He had already seen the world spin in circles. I didn't understand that look back then. I just knew it meant we were in for another hard season. By the time I was a young man, the world was already on fire in its own ways. Protests in the streets, borders tightening, young people drafted into conflicts they didn't start. I lost classmates I used to sit beside in school. I lost neighbors whose doors I used to knock on when my mother sent me to borrow sugar. The strange thing is that life went on. People adapted to fear like it was another kind of weather. You check the sky, you prepare. You hope it doesn't hit your house this time. I'm married at 24, far too young and far too certain that love alone could build a safe world. My wife, Layla, had this way of looking at me when I worried. She'd say, "The world has always been troubled, Elias, but we decide how we carry our part of it." For years, I believed her. For years, we raised our children with the hope that they'd inherit something a little softer than what we grew up with. But every time I watched the news, I felt that old fear creeping back, that sense that the same pattern was slowly unfolding again. When my children were old enough to ask about the conflicts of my youth, I tried to explain them gently, the way you talk about storms without frightening someone who hasn't lived through one yet. What I didn't tell them was that the hardest part wasn't the explosions or the shortages or the nights spent listening for sirens. The hardest part was realizing that the decisions shaping our lives were made by people who never had to face the consequences. They sent out speeches while others sent out funeral notices. They talked about strategy while ordinary people buried their futures. That's what I'm seeing again now. Different names, different borders, different politics, but the same pattern. I see young people torn between anger and despair. I see families packing bags they hope they won't need. I see leaders shaping narratives while everyday people shape their lives around uncertainty. And the older I get, the more I recognize the pattern for what it is. Not a cycle we can't escape, but a cycle we choose not to break. I used to think age would make me cynical. Instead, it's made me painfully aware of who pays the price every time history repeats itself. It's the quiet people, the ones who go to work and keep their heads down and hope their children will see peace. It's the young soldiers who never return home, and the parents who wait for a knock on the door they dread. It's the children who learn too early how to distinguish fireworks from danger. It's the elderly who have to watch it all happen again, powerless to stop it. There's a heaviness that comes with seeing the same lessons ignored over and over. But there's also a responsibility. When I speak to younger people now, I don't tell them what to believe. I just tell them what I've seen. I tell them that the moment a nation starts calling some lives more valuable than others, trouble is already on its way. I tell them that every conflict begins long before the first shot is fired, in the quiet places where empathy is neglected and pride grows unchecked. And I tell them that peace is never built by the loudest voices, but by the ones who choose compassion when fear would be easier. If you're listening to this, I want you to understand something I didn't learn until much later than I wish. History doesn't repeat itself because we forget. It repeats because remembering is not the same as changing. You can carry the memory of a war in your bones and still let the next one happen if you don't speak, if you don't question, if you don't care for the people who will stand on the front lines even when they never asked to be there. I'm 83, and I don't know how many years I have left, but I know this: the world will keep turning with or without our wisdom. And the decisions made today will shape the childhoods and the heartbreaks of people who aren't old enough to understand what's happening around them. So before history loops around again, before we hand the same pain to another generation, I hope we pause long enough to ask who will bear the weight of our choices.